Hello, young Kainite. I see your face is not so lifeless. Your nerves not so deadened that you cannot express shock. Tell me, child, is my appearance that frightening? Or is it my knowledge of you that is so unnerving?
Welcome to the grand finale of this video series. Please leave any comments down below if you want any further details or an answer to a question you may have. But first, please make sure to watch the video because your answers should lie within.
That picture, I created it and it's real! Don't you understand? It is real! I created it and it's real! It's real! Oh, God!
More like world building, am I right, Mr. Mercer? Legend of Vox Machina does not have world building. Oh sure, it loves to bring up questions regarding the world and the setting, but it rarely answers them. And sometimes LVM gives answers to questions that didn't need to be answered. The following is a long list of world building and other problems I noticed within the show, including character or plot mistakes or holes that I only noticed on my latest watch through, or I had forgotten about them because of how mind-numbing the show can be. I will leave helpful timestamps down below to break up the list based on the episodes. Why doesn't the Council of Emon understand what scouts are for? The very nature of their enemy is later revealed to be a dragon, which isn't especially stealthy when they're flying around destroying things. Why doesn't Emon have a court mage? Magic exists in this world and it is very powerful. You would imagine that in this world a king, after waking up, would have his court mage cast spells upon him to make sure he cannot be mind controlled, poisoned, or killed in either a magical or non-magical manner. As well as a variety of other uses a court mage could provide, such as magic detection and mind reading. How does the magic work? Seriously, I have no idea how any magic in this world works. More on this later. Keyleth gets drunk from her first ale. This is strange given the fact that historically, druids took a lot of drugs and alcohol before communing with nature. If Vox Machina gets into a fight every time they go drinking, how are they in jail? Percy's gun jams the first time we see it being fired. It never jams again, so why bother jamming it now? Wait, if they've been kicked out of every tavern for getting into fights and causing property damage, they would have to be a group for a minimum of 2 months to a couple of years, depending on the size of the city. So how is the question of them being together only happening now? Vox Machina is Latin for voice machine. This means that Latin canonically exists in Tal'Dorei. And I don't have to tell you just how insane that is for world building, do I? This isn't the Codex Alera. Scanlan knows what rapping is, even though it's a medieval setting. I'm not opening this packet of worms. They have an airship, but because there is no world building, it only appears for a few minutes and is never expanded upon. I shouldn't have to tell you just how insanely advantageous having the ability to easily move through the air is for a civilization. But like always, it's just shown for the rule of cool, and never used again. I know these people know how to use Chekhov's gun, in theory, so this is just negligent on their part. How did Vex get her tinnitus again? She only hears it when dragons are about or when the plot wants the tinnitus to happen, so it must be magical. Sure would be nice to know more about that and how it works, and how only Vex has it since Vax is a twin. You'd think that if dragons were rare, Vox Machina should all be freaking out that they just fought a dragon and survived, even if it was Keyleth Ex Machina. How can an entire city not talk to the rest of an empire for 10 years? If this ever happened in real life, there would be an utter catastrophe and mass fallout, especially if that city has an incredibly iconic and important landmark. Some might even say a holy landmark. Let's not forget that taxes exist, and this looks to be a medieval age equivalent to our world. So this city would definitely be taxed like all the rest, and when an entire city starts paying their taxes, that usually means war. The king sent out the army after the Shale Steps fell, despite the fact that in the first episode he said he wouldn't, although that only happened because the show needed Vox Machina to go there for the plot. It is strange, however, how the Shale Steps appear to have been the tipping point for the Emperor, as it really was just some village of unimportance. Excuse me, it wasn't an army, it was about 20 men. Imagine only sending 20 men to deal with Attila the Hun. There is a magical lance of dragon slaying. Why doesn't the Emperor buy and or loan this from Gilmore? Why would the Emperor allow such a powerful magical item to just sit in some magic man's magic shop? I understand it's meant to be a fantasy world full of magic, but it's so inconsistent with its world building that it just feels like Vox Machina and the Browers have magic and no one else does, especially since no one else has any magic items either. If anything, some noble or other will have claims on magical items and will demand Gilmore to hand it over, or he will be branded a thief. Scanlan's clothing is made of imported silk, which should fetch a good price in these dire straits. Also, imported from where? Teleportation portals exist. Why isn't this commonplace? Well, like everything else magical, it's simply because the plot decided not to think about it. To steal, quote, Kevin O'Bill's comment, Brimscythe, "The age of man is coming to an end. There was a time when dragons ruled all of Tal'Dorei, when we ruled the entire world." This also means that the opening narration lied to us via omission. It was gods, titans, and dragons. Or maybe dragons came after, or even before the gods and titans. I don't know for sure. The king not sending the army out was the wrong decision. Sure, the plot knows that it was the right thing to do, but no one else does. After all, no one sees a dragon flying about somehow between its lair and the places it raids. The worst part is that the sovereign doesn't know how to scout, since he mentioned before that he sent a part of his army to go deal with it, yet no one was able to come back and say it was a dragon. Scanlan has the power to create magical images of Vox Machina somehow. This only comes up once, and is never used again after that point, even though it can be used to create an ultimate upper hand. Also, the images can create sound, which adds a whole nother level of oh dear god to the situation. Vox Machina didn't take any valuables from the cave despite being poor and running past all of it. Why did the vampires hire vampire hunters? Or rather, why did the creators decide that the Inquisitor garb that most people associate with those that hunt the undead should be worn by allies of the undead? And where did they go after the taking of Whitestone? Just to clear things up, because the show was not forthcoming, Sovereign Uriel is an emperor. They are using Sovereign to be unique. Belt Snake, because magic has no meaning. I am not looking up when those items were invented. Speaking of invented, the concept of pillaments were invented in the 19th century from what I could find, so I don't know how Vax should know what they are. This world runs on Minecraft logic. Fall from a height into water and you won't suffer any substantial damage no matter how far you fall. Apparently the Hollywood trope of twins knowing when the other twin is in trouble must be a fact in this universe. Maybe it's another type of magic the show won't explain. The shadow monsters, despite being powerful and effective, aren't used again by Delilah. They're stronger than zombies by far, and use the same dead bodies as well. Again, this could be justified if the writers did their job and did some world building, giving them believable limitations and requirements to summon. The only consistent thing that Gilith needs to cast spells is for her to be in distress or panicking. She's like Nynaeve Almira, but she forgot to be an amazing character. The Shady Nazgul can't stand the light, so they could put it out somehow, most likely with their own magic. This leads Keyleth to magically create her own light, despite never doing so before, and struggling to do so the first time we see her do it, and with the implications of this being the first time she's ever cast this spell. Perhaps if the show told us how Keyleth's magic worked beforehand, this scene might have been neat. You know, the show arrogantly expects you to already know everything about the world and magic system beforehand. This is despite the show being made to draw new fans into the podcast. Explanations are a core part of storytelling. If anything, The people watching this show will need to watch the podcast to get the vaguest idea about what was going on. If ziggurats were used to contact the gods, why did that practice stop? The carelessly whispered one does appear for a brief moment later, so it might be that they just stopped for a lack of communication, but since there is no world building, I don't know. Future me here. Turns out that the wispy one wasn't a god, but a powerful necromancer. So why would he need a ziggurat to be summoned? Can mortal beings ascend to godhood like pharaohs in this universe? If that zombie wolf survived that because of plot, why did none of the others catch up and kill Machina? It's clear that tearing those things in half isn't enough to stop them. In fact, why were they at the Massacre of Whitestone? They'd have been awfully useful. Why do any of the people within Whitestone trust the Briarwoods? Seriously, none of these people should be trusting the Briarwoods. Why aren't all of these people kicking and screaming for their lives after being dragged in front of the demons who lord over them and bring them nothing but suffering? Keyleth is apparently a princess of the Ashari. I missed this in my character video because this is a one-off line and is never relevant to the story in this season. As you can imagine, having a princess be thrown into mortal danger like this, and if it got found out, may cause a war. Thank God there are no consequences for their actions. Wait a minute, where did those giant undead come from? There aren't any living giants in the setting or shown to live near Whitestone, so where did those ones come from? Their skin hasn't decayed enough to be long dead as well, so the giants must have only been killed recently. Oh, why am I bothering? It's so clear that I'm putting way more thought into this than the creators ever did. Keeper Yemen says it's only been a few years under the Briarwoods. What does that actually mean? Because Percy looks like he went from 15 years old to 20 odd years old. The timeline of events doesn't make any sense either way, but it's still a bizarre thing not to be told. Since the implications of the different times this could be makes Uriel Septim II's design not to go and subjugate the Briarwoods more and more stupid. Not that it wasn't stupid, mind you, seeing as the realm is basically at peace for most of the time and there was nothing better to do. An old resistant hideout. Wait, resistance to what? If this is implying that it was used at the start of the Briarwood occupation, then shouldn't it have been burnt to the ground? If this was meant to say there were rebels against the Roros, well, that's funny. Does this imply that Keeper Yemen sent in all those people, they all died and she ran away? Again, we are never told what that spell on the weapons does, so it could just be a spell that gives bonus damage against the undead, or it could just be a spell that makes the weapons glow. Funnily enough, the beret was invented around the 13th century, so technically knowing what a beret is isn't will breaking. Except the context in which he is asking for one, in which he is referring to the real world iconography it has as a revolutionary symbol, isn't. The beret wasn't seen as a revolutionary symbol until its mass production in the 19th century. Pike didn't know that no spell or curse could block her connection to the Everlight, further fueling my first theory that Pike woke up one day with superpowers. Percy has a scope that lets him see through walls like Superman's X-ray vision. I'm going to assume you're smart enough to understand that wall hacks are incredibly powerful no matter the context. Somehow a random rundown looking prison has a better lot than a nobleman's house. I call shenanigans. Scanlan used his ability to duplicate people without any preparation or movement. That spell is entirely mental. You should be using it all the time considering everyone seems to be falling for it without fail. Vex is shocked that evil McEvilson would sacrifice his own men to save his own life. Is she 12 and half-elf years or just naive? Again, something I didn't really think about during the character section. How was Captain Stonefell the one that Percy was least looking forward to? Wouldn't that have been his tutor, since he knew and trusted him the most out of all those who betrayed him and his family? Would have been nice to know how Percy knew all these people beyond just the tutor. I know I'm jumping ahead a bit, but why wouldn't the Briarwoods have Cassandra under their mind control all the time? In fact, why wouldn't they have made everyone in Whitestone under their mind control all the time as well? All they need to do is have Silas look into their eyes apparently. So Whitestone is named after the Whitestone material native to that region that can be refined into giant green crystals that can amplify magic. So what does that mean? How does this serve the greater story? I have no clue. There also seems to be a blue crystal there as well that seems to be innately magical. What is that? Where'd it come from? I don't know. And it doesn't matter either because this scene might be set up, but it doesn't pay off much later. Oh sure, the crystals turn up again for the ziggurat and Liar's necklace, but you think it will do more than just those two things. In a better show, this scene will be setting up 3 things. Why the Professor would betray the Dorolos, which it does do thankfully. The relationship between Percy and Cassandra, which it doesn't really do since we don't get to see them interact in a normal environment. And the crystals for later. The blue crystal literally explodes when the green crystal gets near it. That would be like proto-gunpowder when used properly. Imagine that's how Percy fired his pepper box. He remembered the lessons Professor Anders taught him and used it for his weapon. A lot could have been set up in this scene, but the only payoff I can think of is the Professor being evil and Cassandra being almost killed by him later. But then again, he was more angry at what she was rather than who she was. I know I didn't cover him in the previous video because he is a minor character, but all of my favourite lines in the show are from Professor Anders. He's so evil, it's just fun to watch. And the best part is, he's only evil because the Dorolos didn't give him enough money to triple the output of the refinery process of crystals that literally amplify magic. Something that, in a world where magic has rules, sounds insanely valuable. Imagine in real life if there was a crystal that, when you put it in your phone battery, would triple the energy left inside of it, going from 5% charge to 90% charge, and staying that way with the crystal near. Yeah, when you put it into perspective, Professor Anders is a genius who wouldn't ever be appreciated in his time, and wouldn't ever be because the Dorolos screwed him over, and he stupidly decided to side with the Briarwoods, who most likely made him unable to publish his works. Percy having a gun is ridiculous, especially the kind he has in the show. Yes, it's rustic and archaic, but the technology used to make it fire bullets and even function would not exist in the world Percy is in. To put it bluntly, the time period Terraria is in means that Percy should not have even the barest knowledge of how to make a weapon like a pepper box. At best, he could know how to make a flintlock, but instead, it's almost like a revolver with how it's designed. Except the animators don't always animate the gun's barrel rotating, which was a strange budget cut, I'm assuming, especially considering that some of the shots later on in the show that are meant to be impactful require this spinning action. To give some context, the first pepper box design was made around the 15th century, but that still had each barrel fired by an individual match. Around 1790, they were built with flintlock systems, but the most popular early design came around in 1807 until 1821. All of this required one major factor to happen: the Industrial Revolution. Percy's pepper box is effectively an American Civil War pepper box revolver, which probably inspired the gun in the first place. This is why when you're writing a show that is meant to be serious and taken seriously, you think about the world-building implications and why you hire an expert to come in and take a look at your designs to make sure they will fit in the setting. This is why you world build properly, to explain how something like this could even be imagined by the characters. Especially since the show never explains where Percy gets his gunpowder from. All this is to say, Percy shouldn't have a gun, and if he must, then it should be extremely primitive, and the show should explain how Percy is using a magical alternative to gunpowder, which could have been set up in the Professor and his backstory section. Anyway, how did Percy go from homeless to a blacksmith/engineer? The writers know how serfdom works, right? Even if this society wasn't based on serfdom, Percy going from homeless urchin to craftsman without any explanation is rather obtuse. Would have been interesting to learn about Percy's mentor, since there's no way Percy learned the craft all on his own, making something that shouldn't even exist without the necessary funds to do so either. I can let the gods playing jokes and demons pass. It's a joke that I know is not meant to be anything more than that. How isn't he holding his crown jewels from having them meet the Nutcracker? Is the show telling us that Scanlan is a gelding? Seems like dinosaurs ruled the world before the gods, so the dragons, the titans, and blah 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 blah. I know I sound like a broken record, but since I have no idea how the magic works in this setting, the energies this chamber clockwork astrology thing can channel might as well be kinetic. Apparently, dirt, a leaf, a twig of thyme, and spit can revive the dead or keep them from dying, and at the very least, heals people. Everyone would be a level 1 druid if it meant things like mortal wounds and diseases would not be a problem. I don't know how a shiny tongue can make armor move, But it's Anders, so I don't really care. Vox Machina didn't realise they could probably stop the armor moving if... Holy shit, Vex's arrows just multiply? Conservation of mass, no! So I have no idea what's going on in this vision realm. Are we seeing Pike's soul since she's glowing? Perhaps this is the plot dimension I have heard so much about. Soul Invictus. I know this is more of a plot or trope thing than a worldbuilding thing, but you think that people will go straight for the person doing the mind controlling and ignore the people being mind controlled? There's 3 of Vox Machina, so 2 of you could distract the mind controlled Grog and the other can kill Anders. Most of the group has ranged attacks as well. No, Percy is not Captain America. How does Grog even have the conception or connect the dots? Again, the concept was invented far after the show takes place technology-wise or culturally-wise. Oh, and do not use the excuse of it's just a phrase. The job of a writer is to be creative and come up with ways to not break the world building being presented. It's called immersion, and this show hates it. Oh my god, so Terraria is literally the material plane of existence. Matt Mercer really did just do the Mr. Bean meme and copy the Forgotten Realms.
We do not choose. We walk down a path.
What pseudo-intellectual horsemanure is that? They mean the exact same thing. She might as well have said, we don't walk down a path, we choose. Lord above, these writers really wonder why AI can write better than them. Lady Briarwood literally listened to the intrusive voices in her head, and for once, it didn't backfire. Until they had the plot forced upon them, of course. You see, when a mummy vampire and a daddy vampire love each other very much, they get the Dark Lord of whatever to make someone else a vampire. Turns out that the Crispy One is actually some powerful necromancer in another dimension, and he wants to get back to Morte realm because, sure. Actually, a little theory here. It would be quite funny if the Whispered One was a powerful necromancer. We had come to realise that everyone else who tried to do necromancy were all a bunch of evil blackhearts. So he created a religion around himself about him becoming the usher of the Dark Age if he is summoned back to the material plane. However, in the notes he gives and the magic he provides, he always makes sure that he can choose whether or not to return and send something else in his stead. This is why the black orb that can stir people up can appear. In his mind, anyone stupid enough to touch the orb will get sucked in, and his zealots might just be stupid enough to think that it's a sign for them to come join him. Then again, that requires the show to actually be funny and nuanced. What does Vax mean, aren't these supposed to be slow? They're zombies. Why would you have presumed anything unless you fought them in the past, or have preconceived knowledge? Wait a minute, does this imply that there isn't an encyclopedia for monsters? Well, I know how to get giga rich overnight in Tal'Dorei. Oh right, Vax has Batman Beyond instant batarang daggers. I've already done the conservation of mass bit, I'm not doing it again. Wait a minute, there is something else. Is this implying that Vax uses magic? Was the belt snake not an enchantment, but rather a spell? God, I hate it when literal magic is used to explain away plot points. It truly is a mark of a poor storyteller. You see, that gun I can believe in. It's almost a shotgun, overstuffed with metal, gunpowder, and, hypothetically, magic. Although it should have burned up in Percy's face, but that's more of a desire than a fact. Wait a minute. Archibald has a Scottish accent. Why does he, a presumed native of Whitestone, have a Scottish accent? Wouldn't he talk more like Percy, or have an American accent similar to Percy's posh American accent? That brings up a bigger question. There's a lot of different skin tones and races in Emon, and a mixture of humans in Whitestone, and that only happens if there's a lot of travelling going on. That would suggest a healthy trade network and migration to the city, which the Briarwoods completely disrupted. Then there's also the fact that no one was allowed to leave Whitestone, meaning Whitestone never paid taxes to the Emperor. Oh my god, how do you screw up not having one consistent accent for a city so much that it causes me to think about the implications of the city's health in trade and migration? Wow, Keyleth, would have been nice to save Archibald. Also, Keyleth Ex Machina again. Speaking of Deus Ex Machinas, Pike in the Machine.
Are you dead?
Astral projection.
Your ass what?
I'm here, buddy, but my body is back at the temple.
So to put what's wrong with that sentence to summary, if Pike's spirit is going outside her body, She should be dead. No moving or twitching at all. But thanks to lack of will building, I don't know if it's a situation in which the living soul is tied to the body or something else entirely. Why does a world in which the gods can talk to you not have more of a clerical presence? Imagine being in the Vatican and goddess is sitting by the Pope, yet most people remain aloof to even visiting the temples, even though the gods supposedly can give you superpowers if you worship them right. At least give me the Pathfinder reason for atheists. They don't deny the existence of gods, but instead deny them their worship, as they do not believe the gods are worthy of their worship. The Brywoods had a really good estate. Too bad they decided to give it all up because Silas caught the Ching-Chong virus. Wow, it sure was nice for the goddess of light, redemption and compassion to give Pike the powers of divine artillery strikes, the Diablo 2's Paladin's spinny hammer, and a massive power-up. Demon possession. Guess two personalities and souls can inhabit the same body, or is it more like a soul parasite? Maybe the latter, but it's not explained, so who knows? Man, what is it with this world and not paying smart people to do their jobs? Seriously, Yo-Yo Septon II should get on this and send out an empire-wide consensus on every smart person who's not being funded enough so he can buy them out and make a university of invention like Rand did in The Wheel of Time. Maybe his people wouldn't be stuck in the Dark Ages then. Remember what Yemen said before? Bridge, death and all that? I guess now that they have glowy pointy sticks, they think they can take on the bridge. Well, for those of you who don't know, the podcast of this show was based on is Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. The edition where they pretty much removed alignments from the game. Those glowy sticks, at best, would do bonus damage against the undead, but normal damage against anything else. If this was 1st edition D&D, Advanced D&D, or 3.5, then those glowy sticks might be good glowy sticks, dealing more damage to evil characters. Too bad this is not a better edition of D&D, is it then? Mixed science and magic. Yeah, no, you don't get to say that. If you want to know what a world is like when you actually do the whole magic versus science idea properly, go play Arcanum, which has much better world building than this show. Oh hey, Residium, it finally came back. Huzzah. Should have been used more since the whole city is named after it. These people should be looking like Clan Scryer with how much Residium they should have made in 5 to 10 years. I didn't remember how much of a awful person Cassandra was. Seriously, she just got saved from the Brywoods by her brother who she thought was dead or would never come back, and she treats him so ungratefully, and nobody calls her out for this. Vax has a flaming dagger. Whatever, you already know how stupid this is. No, unless these are really dry catacombs, they should all be skeletons. Also, who lit all the torches? Nah, I'm not going to comment on how they dress. I don't know enough about fashion or historical fashion to complain. This scene is extra funny when you remember that the summoning fails. The Whispered One appears and then disappears, so technically they could have just left and came back with an army and they pretty much get the same result. That's what you get when you don't say your threats and stakes properly, especially if you don't deliver on them.
Cass! What are you doing?
Oh, now you forgot to swear, even though now would actually be an appropriate time to swear. And the fact Percy isn't makes this scene worse and less impactful. Oh, but it's just a word, you may say. Yes, and in the department of writing, every word matters, whether it is or isn't stated. Did you see it? She's been under mind control the entire time. Too bad the plot did nothing with it until now. And please put Evan into your voice acting. You sound like you're either bored on bath salts or both. What is it with these people not knowing how mind control works by now? They just fought a mini-boss whose whole thing was mind control.
Pike, can't you just, pass through walls?
I'm not a ghost, Scanlan.
Yes, you are.
Wait, that's it. Heavy.
How does Scanlan know heavy metal exists? That's it. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, exactly. We need to triangulate its location.
The blood and ashes are you talking about? You need to look for its location. You don't have the reason nor the means to triangulate. The writers probably thought that they could sound smarter if they used fancy words, but since they didn't use them correctly, they look like fools. Also, it is nice for the Briarwoods to install switches at the top and bottom of the acid trap to disable it, because making a way to disable it from within entirely defeats the point of having the trap in the first place. Grog should have lost his eyes immediately if that's acid. How doesn't Scanlan know about the planes? He's seen tieflings, he's had intercourse with a tiefling, and a demon too maybe, so he should know that hell exists at least. Oh, there's also multiple planes of existence. Stop stealing ideas from other things that you have no idea how to comprehend. If you want to know how to properly handle a multiverse setting, just look into the Planescape setting, because it does it spectacularly. Here we are, folks. We are at one of the worst scenes in the entire show. In the world of Dungeons and Dragons, here we have it. 2 godforsaken Kamehamehas. I simply cannot believe this show exists. You have the whole roster of spells and magic for Dungeons and Dragons, and you decide, let's do the Kamehameha twice. Beam attacks are just the worst thing ever. I really hate them. I really hate beam struggles because it is such a poor writing device, especially when you have access to so many other better spells to use in a situation, and yet you go for Kamehamehas. It just speaks to the lack of creativity and the lack of care put into this material. I'm surprised Vox Machina knew that vampires were weak to sunlight, given how this is probably the only one in existence, or at least the only public one in existence. Scanlan never thought to use a muting spell before this. Would have been mighty useful in episode 3. Speaking of magic, Delilah just forgot she could teleport. All that build up to nothing. Imagine the Death Star fired at Alderaan, and instead of exploding, the beam missed. What is the purpose of not killing Delilah right now? Wow, so it's just that easy to make a healing spell. So no one should be dying of accidents that don't kill immediately in this world.
He has to reload eventually.
Oh right, reloading! How is he shooting so many bullets? Stating the problem doesn't fix the problem.
Your torment and thirst for revenge called me to your side. An unspoken partnership.
Wow, it's that easy to summon demons into Tal'Dorei. That might be easier than Planescape in some respects, given that doorways may appear everywhere in the multiverse, but the only place where it's consistent is Sigil, and you need the right key as well. I know, I write on about this scene too much already, but this time I have something different to ask about. What is a Titan? That is all. Actually, why does the very first scene give exposition about the history of the world, even though it never becomes relevant to the narrative? No, there's no way a starved population could have someone that buff unless they ate like 5 people's portions or something. Not really a world building thing, but more just a general writing tip and real life tip. Don't touch it, don't eat it, don't drink it, and don't even think about it. Magic Tree Portal. At least Keyleth gave some excuse as to why she didn't use it before. Apart from her newfound confidence, I really do not know the difference between how strong she is now compared to before. Percy made a new gun real quick despite saying it would take him a long time. Wait, can Yo-Yo Septon's family walk through walls? Or did they just teleport behind him? Yeah, we all know how I feel about this scene, and I gave all my known grievances before in the character episode. Vex's Tinnitus appears from very far away this time, and I still do not know how it works. Ha! I almost forgot, the last shot is CGI. What a brilliant way to end this terrible season of telly.
While a lot of these could be their own in-depth discussion, I wish to focus on what I believe to be the most important part of world building that is not explained: the magic. There are no given reasons as to why Scanlan, Keyleth or Pike, and possibly Vax could cast magic in LVM. The only reason I could guess is that you are given magic based on how you dress and act, meaning you have to fulfill a stereotype to be able to cast certain spells, or a divine being has to give you powers overnight. I also don't know why they could only cast spells that are on theme. Why doesn't Scanlan cast druidic spells, and why does he need a lute to use magic are both questions without answers. There's also the fact that spellcasters in LVM seemingly learn brand new spells on the fly. I don't understand at all how that works, as the show doesn't even give a lame explanation that it's intuitive or something similar. In fact, there is no explanation at all. What's worse is that I have heard arguments for this style of world building, and not just in regards to the magic system. A style of world building in which you do not explain things to the audience because you do not want to do exposition. I believe this is a symptom of the misconstrued idea that showing is always better than telling. Yes, if you can show over tell. However, there are some things you cannot show and must tell clearly to the audience. It's not a simple black and white dichotomy in which one must use show over tell or tell over show. Both show and tell must be used properly so that your audience can be immersed and understand what's going on in your media. Otherwise, you get situations like LVM where it's all show and very little tell, and when it does tell, it hates the idea of tell so much that it doesn't tell enough, such as the Professor Anders teaching Percy and Cassandra scene, where we should have learnt a whole lot more but only came away with one thing. The actual argument for this style comes from the idea that the show is based off a podcast which uses the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition magic system, a magic system that they consider to be too gamey for television or movies. They believe that the show is better off just using the excuses of exhaustion or too weak, an offhand explanation to explain the limitations of spells rather than spell slots, which they consider to be too complicated to comprehend in a show's limited runtime. That's right, these people genuinely believe that you're too stupid to understand spell slots, something early teenagers or even younger people can understand and wrap their heads around when they play Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder as spellcasters. Of course, there are plenty of works that use exhaustion or too weak as their limitations that are brilliant, but this is a double-edged sword, as a spellcaster suddenly being too exhausted to cast spells, if not set up properly, can come off as contrived, which in turn removes any suspense or stakes from the story. An example of another problem when using exhaustion as a limitation would be Pike, who gets her power from a higher being. This leads to a scenario in which a supposedly good goddess allows an innocent child to die within the arms of one of her own clerics. Questions such as how could a goddess who gives her powers to her followers allow such a thing to happen, and what are the limitations of the goddess's power if this is allowed to happen, naturally arise but are never answered in the story. Some people truly believe in not explaining how the magic system works, even when it is used to solve so many problems within the narrative. They believe that it's better that they come off as Deus Ex Machinas over a fleshed out and interesting magic system. I can spend hours, maybe even days, trying to find out why they believe these writers should be so lazy. But I guess this isn't the strangest thing humans have ever done. There are two main counterpoints I've come up with to the too gamey argument. The first is that they could have come up with their own magic system, similar to Dungeons & Dragons, but easier to explain for the purposes of the show. This should appease those who are of the belief that people are too stupid to understand how spell slots work. The second counterpoint would be that you need to read more books. The spell slot system from Dungeons & Dragons was inspired by a book series called Dying Earth by Jack Vance. Every morning, wizards would have to memorize the spells they wanted to cast, and when they cast that spell, they forgot it due to how ridiculously long the incantations were, which is similar to spending a spell slot they had prepared, which they would need to prepare again when they rest. The way you get around this in Dungeons & Dragons is with a spell scroll in which you inscribe the spell onto the scroll, essentially making it remember the spell for you. Not only that, but traditional Dungeons & Dragons has a Vancian magic system, which for the worlds of Dungeons & Dragons means that they aren't actually magical, but a previous civilization was so advanced that their technology, from the perspectives we see the world from as its current inhabitants, believe that it's magic. For those of you who know, this is indeed Arthur C. Clarke's third law of magic. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. This was the original reason for magic to exist in the Dungeons & Dragons setting, and was the favoured explanation of Gary Gygax. Although this has silently been retconned over time, because the Forgotten Realms is awful. But for the world of Vox Machina, I have a feeling the world isn't Vancian, mainly because a Vancian magic system typically has a rigid magic system, or at the very least has rules. The show was made for new people to get into the podcast, a podcast which was made for fun. But the show takes itself too seriously and counterbalances that by acting too immaturely to compensate. It wants to be both a drama and a comedy at the same time, but the writers lack the skills required to balance the two genres properly. The show was made with a mindset that you would not be paying attention to what was really being said or shown. This is why I had to rewatch the show multiple times to make sure I got everything down, and why I missed a single line mentioning Keyleth was a princess on all my watch-throughs until my latest one. A line that should have changed the stakes and seriousness of the story, but instead is treated as a throwaway fact. The only reason this show has excessive violence, sexual content, and crude language is that it appeals to a more general audience who craves more Game of Thrones. Those three qualities being what Hollywood writers think a general audience wants from that show, forgetting that people only like those parts because it was well written and brought the new age fantasy kickstarted by Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series to those outside of the traditional fantasy reader circles. I want to give a special mention to the pacing of this show. It's bloody awful, and if you wish to watch this show, just skip the first 2 episodes. Not because the rest is any better, but simply because the first 2 episodes are far faster paced compared to the rest. The writers should have kept Percy's arc to at most 5 to 6 episodes, and yet they gave it 10 full episodes. And yet it all feels like a side story since I don't care about these characters enough to have an entire season dedicated to only one of them. Again, this show was meant to draw in new fans to the podcast and to be a celebration of it as well. Yet they decided to adapt a story which revolves around only one of the characters, pushing everyone else to the sidelines. I know that many of you might still be confused as to why I even started this series to begin with, so I'll tell you. I went into Legend of Vox Machina with the hope that it would turn out to be a good time. People told me it was good, that the podcast was good, and that it would be a refreshing break from all the other terrible fantasy shows like Waste of Time, Rings of Power, and any other fantasy show that has come out recently. But this wasn't the case. Instead, this show utterly broke me after I finished it, and it was for one simple reason. For those other shows, I went in with negative expectations. I knew they were bad going in, and I was proven right by its contents. But I went into LVM with good expectations, that even if it wasn't good, it was at least watchable. LVM left me shattered for a whole week as I tried to wrap my mind around how this show tricked so many people into liking it. A show that was just as bad as all the other horrendous fantasy shows that had been coming out. Yet the people who hated those shows like me enjoyed LVM and praised it, despite it having the exact same problems as the rest. The only real difference being that it's an animation this time instead of live action. And while I do believe speculative fiction is best enjoyed as animation over live action, That only matters if the story being told is good in the first place. I've said it throughout this series, but the quickest and easiest way to make the show good and to fix most of its problems is to make it a comedic parody or satire of itself, instead of being a completely serious adult show written for children. Things like Percy's edginess, the lack of world building, the internet humour and dialogue, the Everlight giving Pike a power-up because she chose the power of friendship over the embrace of the goddess and her church, all of the Deus Ex Machinas. All of this is really hilarious if you think about it from the right perspective. And we know this will work because Grog exists. Grog is proof that when you write this show with self-awareness, you can't help but laugh at it. This is the kind of show that will probably be amazing if it had an abridged series made for it by fans of the show and podcast, since they most likely wouldn't take themselves seriously as the show did. Hell, I might even consider helping the production of such an abridged series because it could be spectacularly hilarious if done right. Now, remember way back when I stated that the Legend of Vox Machina had $4 million in budget? Well, I looked up again. Turns out, I was wrong. The Legend of Vox Machina actually had a budget of $9 million for Season 1. From what information I could find, the show was initially going to be a single episode special, but the Kickstarter got so popular that Amazon picked it up for an entire season. According to their own Kickstarter, a single 22-minute animated episode costs $750,000 to make. So, let's do some maths. We find that the total runtime of Season 1 is 304 minutes. If we divide 750,000 by 22 minutes, we get roughly $34,091 a minute. $34,091 a minute times by 304 minutes gives us a total needed budget of $10,363,664, and that's just for the first season. According to their own Kickstarter, they went over $1 million over budget. Even if Amazon subsidized the show, you would think the creators would have cut back on the runtime, not hired unnecessary and expensive famous actors, or a multitude of other things that this show did when it really couldn't afford to. I believe this show, at the very least, could have looked even better if it didn't stretch itself over 12 episodes. If it pulled the story down into 6 or 7 episodes, the show might actually look good beyond the occasionally pretty decent background. It is finally over. I wish to say that this show is a prime example of why you must always redraft. Everything within this show feels like they just said it, wrote it down, and then moved on to the next scene. The script I'm reading from has been revised at least 10 times because I wanted to make it as good as it could be. If I had stuck with the first draft, this video series would have been far more rambling and borderline incoherent at points, not to mention my voice work because I am never satisfied with it. Due to how negative this series was, let's end it on a positive note. Here are some better shows to watch over LVM. If you want to watch a great animated show that is actually funny, watch Invader Zim. If you want to watch an amazing animated show with an incredible ensemble cast set in a fantasy world, watch Avatar: The Last Airbender. And finally, if you want to watch a show that is phenomenal in every way, watch Batman the Animated Series. Also, if you want to know how to properly worldbuild a fantasy world, play Planescape Torment. Thank you for watching, and I wish you all the best. Now go read the first 4 Dune books.